Today I'm talking about what's been happening in Flint, Michigan, and I'm going to be kind of explaining the water crisis so far. So 10 years ago, in 2017, Flint prepared to use the Flint River water as their emergency water source, and they are the only city in Genesee County that is willing to use Flint River as an emergency water source. In 2011, the state of Michigan took over Flint's finances after an audit projected a $25 million deficit. Even though Flint's water supply was $9 million in the red or in debt, officials were still using money from this fund to cover shortfalls from their general funds. Basically, the city became so broke that the governor of Michigan, Rick Snyder, had to kind of take over and appoint new emergency managers to kind of take over, govern the city, and cut costs. In March of 2012, Genesee County announced that they had new pipeline plans that led from Lake Huron to the city of Flint. And Lake Huron was a very clean and fresh water source, unlike the Flint River. One of Snyder's managers decided that Flint should stop buying water from Detroit, which used Lake Huron as a water source, and join a new water district. The problem was that the pipeline that would connect the city to the new water source hadn't been built yet, and instead of arranging a temporary contract with Detroit, the new manager signed an order to pump water out of the Flint River. Doing this was expected to save about $1 million per year, and transitioning to the new water source would take about 2 years. The city got the go-ahead to switch to using Flint water in the meantime in 2013 from the state treasurer, Andy Dillon. And the issue with the Flint River was that it was not a clean water source. It was very difficult to sanitize because it contained high levels of chloride, which is a chemical that is very corrosive to metal. And unfortunately, a lot of the Flint residents' pipes were made from lead and iron. And corroding iron consumes chlorine, which defeats the pathogen killer that's added to drinking water in order to make it safe. The river itself is not tainted with lead, even though it is tainted with decades of industrial waste, sewage, and farm runoff. But when the water passes through the really dirty old pipes, it corrodes the lead from the pipes, and it takes it with it to the residents of Flint's home and their businesses. Most of the homes built before the 1980s, the copper pipes were fused with lead solder. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, the MDEQ, they weren't treating the water with anti-corrosive agents, which is a violation of the federal law. So the river was 19 times more corrosive than the water from Detroit. Water pipes from Detroit were coated with orthophosphate, which prevented the water from touching the lead pipes and from being corroded. But the pipes leading from the Flint River to the residents, they didn't have this barrier in order to keep the water clean. So the switch was made in April 2014, and right away the citizens of Flint knew that something was not right. The water coming out of the taps, it had a funny smell and taste to it, and it was a brownish yellow color. In August and September of 2014, the city issued multiple boil water advisories after E. coli and other disease-causing organisms, as well as fecal coliform bacteria, may have been contaminating the water, and the officials' response to this issue was just to flush the whole system and to add more chlorine. In 2005, the city warned the residents that the water contains byproducts of disinfectants that may cause health issues and may even lead to cancer over time. This was after the state found that the level of disinfecting chemical in the water exceeded the threshold set by the Safe Drinking Water Act. Yet the water was still said to be safe to drink for the general public, even though elderly and parents of young children were said to consult with their doctor first. In January, the University of Michigan found high lead levels in their Flint campus, and by the next month, February, the first home tested for positive for elevated lead levels at nearly 7 times the EPA's limit. And then by April, children started being tested positive for lead. In March of 2015, city council members voted 7-1 to switch back to Detroit Water, and Detroit even offered to waiver the reconnection fee of, I think, $4 million, but they were overruled by the state-appointed emergency manager, Jerry Ambrose, who said that switching back to Detroit Water would be too expensive. The state of Michigan told residents to not worry, and an MDEQ spokesman said anyone who is concerned about lead in the drinking water in Flint can relax. It doesn't look like there is any broad problem with the water supply freeing up lead as it goes to homes. The residents continued to complain over the water issue, showing them their water bottles of brownish yellow water, and the Detroit Free Press reported the children of Flint having rashes and mysterious illnesses. Independent researchers from Virginia Tech tested Flint's water, and from hundreds of samples, they found widespread lead contamination. There's no safe levels for water in lead, but the EPA puts a limit over at 15 parts per billion, classifies water tainted above 5,000 parts per billion as hazardous waste. Tests from the Virginia Tech researchers revealed lead contamination as high as 13,200 parts per billion. And up until this point, state officials were in denial about the whole water crisis. But in October of 2015, Governor Snyder made the decision to switch back to paying for Detroit Water, which cost the state $9 to $12 million. In December of 2015, the lead levels were still well above the federal action level at 15 parts per billion, and Flint's new mayor then decided to declare a state of emergency. In January of 2016, the White House declared it a federal state of emergency in Michigan and provided the citizens with water test kits, water filters, filter cartridges, and other necessary related items. The National Guard was mobilized to help distribute the clean water. The city was asking the president for $55 million to install lead-free pipes throughout the city, but that was denied. Obama gave Flint $5 million, and he went there to visit them in May of 2016 to show his support for them. There was 14 deaths related to the water crisis, and between 6,000 and 12,000 children were exposed to lead. Some of the effects of exposure to lead include headaches, sleeping problems, loss of developmental skills, high blood pressure, anemia, memory loss, behavioral problems, low IQ, growth delays, comas, seizures, and even death. Because of this issue in Flint, 4 people were fired, 4 resigned, 5 were suspended, and there were 13 criminal indictments. Mike Glasgow, who was a supervisor at a Flint treatment plant at the time, was accused for tampering with evidence by changing lead results in an official report. Prisby of MDEQ was accused of authorizing an operating permit for the Flint water treatment plant, knowing that it would fail to provide clean water. The 2 men were accused of telling residents to pre-flush their taps before water samples were collected for official reports. 2016, so last year, lawyers, some that were with the NAACP, filed class action lawsuits against Lockwood, Andrews, and Newman, PC, the state of Michigan, Governor Snyder, and others. Plaintiffs were seeking damages for those affected by the water crisis. Criminal charges were filed against a few government employees and a district water supervisor for MDEQ. All are on administrative leaves. Also last year, about 514 Flint residents filed lawsuits against the EPA demanding over $220 million in damages for the EPA's role in the crisis. In January of 2017, the MDEQ said that the water in Flint was below federal lead limit at 12 parts per billion. Apparently, earlier this month, May 17th, it's been reported that 128 blood tests may have registered falsely low lead levels. There has also been a notice warning to about 8,000 residents that their water will be cut off if they continue to not pay for it. But they shouldn't have to pay for water that is contaminated and brown. And so still in May of 2017, people are having, in Flint, Michigan, brown contaminated water. 18,000 to 28,000 homes still need their service lines replaced. So in March of 2017, the EPA awarded Flint $100 million for drinking water infrastructure upgrades to at least 18,000 homes, and the city is planning to complete 6,000 homes per year up until 2019. Entrepreneur and former NBA player Jeff Grayer is a project manager of W.T. Stevens Construction, which is headed by his wife Rhonda and her family. They're a Black-owned business that is located in Flint, Michigan. They were one of the 4 companies that was chosen to reconstruct the pipelines in Flint. They have been in business for over 25 years, and they employ 25 workers. And Jeff says that 800 pipes have been replaced so far. So the population of Flint, Michigan is 98,310. 41.2% of the population is under the poverty line. 56.6% of the population is African American, 37% is white, 4% Latino, the rest is mixed. Michigan Civil Rights Commission issued a report called The Flint Water Crisis, Systemic Racism Through the Lens of Flint, which talks about how systemic and environmental racism contributed to the water crisis. They recommended some changes to make, which included a better way to select emergency managers and not to be solely focused on cutting costs, and to have more inclusion from the citizens of the community. It also mentions that if this were a predominantly white town, that this issue never would have happened. A resident was quoted saying, "If this was a white area in a rich area, there would have been something done," which is completely true. You never hear about things getting so horribly out of hand in white communities because somebody would have done something to fix it way sooner and not just let it keep going on and getting worse and worse. They said cities like Ann Arbor and Birmingham, which are majority white, would have been treated differently by the state. The NAACP was quoted saying, "Would more have been done and at a much faster pace if nearly 40% of Flint residents were not living below the poverty line? The answer is unequivocally yes." Black Lives Matter has also spoken out and said that African Americans, especially those in rural and poor areas, have long been denied equal access to clean drinking water. The crisis in Flint is not an isolated incident. State violence in the form of contaminated water or no access to water at all is pervasive in Black communities. I would really love to hear your opinion on this, and if you agree with the Black Lives Matter movement that this is an issue of racism, systemic and environmental racism, that it got so out of hand and it dragged on for such a long time because it is an issue of racism. I really appreciate watching, and I would love to hear from you in the comments or in a message. I'm sorry that I was reading half of the information in today's video because I'm just very tired. I didn't get much sleep, so it's hard to kind of memorize all of the numbers and all the stats and repeat it back to you. So I kind of wrote it down, and I'm sorry that I'm reading half of it, but my brain just isn't working today. So thank you for watching. I hope you subscribe for future videos, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thank you for watching.